Здравствуйте. Петлицу, наверное, не надо. Ну, мы будем микрофон передавать. Попрошу вас сесть всех поближе, потому что у нас тут не так много, как хотелось бы. У нас здесь представлены спикеры, которые были сегодня на конференции. Вы можете им задавать вопросы, они будут вам отвечать. Но это будет чуть позже. Сейчас я хочу сделать маленькое объявление. После окончания всех докладов у нас будет виски-пати. И мы думаем организовать такие уголки, в которых вы можете поговорить со спикерами про тулы конкретные. У нас есть здесь разработчики тула Cypress, есть разработчики репорт-портала, есть другие разработчики, там концепт и т.д. и т.п. То есть, если вам это интересно, вы просто после окончания доклада, наверное, Коля там нарисует какие-то указатели, или вы просто увидите этих людей. Во время виски-пати, там до, после, можно просто их найти, поймать и поговорить на темы, которые вас интересуют. Окей? Great. So let me start this session. I will bring microphone to the guys, and maybe if you have any question regarding some automation tools and so on, we can start talking here. So, who is who? Maybe you will introduce yourself. So let's start from Marcus.
I am Marcus Merrill. I am the Director of Technical Services for Sauce Labs. I'm here to represent Sauce Labs and answer questions about the tool. However, I have only been there for 2 months. I was a customer for 8 years beforehand, so if anything, I probably have similar problems rather than solutions. So don't be too hard on me, but I'm glad to be here.
Всем добрый вечер, я Глеб Бахмутов, я из компании Cypress. Мы делаем штуку, другие люди ею пользуются, так что я рад быть здесь.
Dave Hefner, member of the Selenium project, core maintainer for Selenium IDE. I work for Apple Tools as a software engineer, primarily working full-time on Selenium IDE.
Hi, my name is Dmitry Guminyuk. We also do another shtuku. It also works, brings some benefits, and it's free because it's open source. The name of it is the report portal, so any questions about the report portal can be asked right here.
Меня зовут Миша. Если вы были в этом зале на предыдущем докладе, я делал концепт.js и до сих пор его делаю. И наша основная цель – это отделить тесты от запуска браузеров, чтобы можно было гонять одно и то же и в веб-драйвере, и в протракторе, и в Puppeteer. Ну и с этим мы справляемся. That's all.
Добрый день, я Артем. Я буду фасилитировать это все мероприятие. So yeah, I'm Artem and I will be facilitator of this exercise. Yep. Let's start. Let's start with, we need to have either question or a topic. Yep.
Hello. My question mostly related to these apply tools, but it's more a wide question. Now there are more spread tools which are doing like visual validation and some testing based on AI and machine learning. And as far as I know, most of them require you to upload your data to the cloud, to their system. But consider that a lot of businesses, they have sensitive data and they have sensitive applications which they don't want to share in the cloud, they are air-gapped. So how your business will solve a problem for these companies? Because these companies also want to improve and have this. Thank you.
So, who's ready to answer?
We need another mic.
Okay. So specifically for Apple Tools, since that's where I work, so the way that we solve that for companies, traditionally enterprises that have high security needs, is we have an on-premise iServer that can be installed. And so we can account for that security, so the data stays on-prem, doesn't have to go anywhere. As far as other solutions, I'm not sure what they do for any competing tools. I know there's also competing open source solutions that also offer some kind of visual validation. There's quite a lot of libraries and tools out there. And based on my experience working with a handful of them, none of them are as good as what Applitools offers. The argument that's been made, regardless for visual testing, is I don't care what tool people use. I care that people do visual validation because I think it will make their testing practice better and they'll be more successful. And odds are if they use visual checks, they'll eventually become a customer. And then if they have security needs, then Applitools has that covered. So.
Yep, so we have a strong topic, right? That's the visual validation is the best thing, which is the best thing which is done in Applitools, right?
Yeah, actually there's more too that we've offered. But yeah, there's other services more recently we've launched too, which are kind of game changing.
Any other expert opinion on that? What about the South Labs? How they solve that?
I don't understand all the wizardry around it because I'm not a network developer, but we have this IPsec tunnel that we open called Sauce Connect, which allows people to portion off an area of our thing that is completely dedicated to living within their virtual private cloud. As far as I know, it solves the overt needs of the financial and government regulated businesses that we have as customers.
Nope.
I have a next question. So since we have people who involved in developing Cypress.io and at the same time committee of Selenium, there are lots of talks right now about that basically WebDriver is going to die. So I would like to raise this question, right? And so like two sides, right? So what's your feeling like how it's going to be like maybe like in 5 years? I think people are interested like, so will they be like on the same page like, or somebody will replace other tool? What's your feeling?
So the question is Selenium going to die in 5 years? It's a strong one. Yeah, somebody should die.
Ooh, who's dying in 5 years?
I don't know what's going to happen in 5 days. You ask me about 5 years. No one's going to die, right? I guarantee that. Nothing really dies. Java is still around. C, C++ is still around. They don't die, they fork, and then someone else takes over. So we're all going to be here. You're going to be sick of us anyway. So.
That brings up an interesting topic, which is the conversation around and the comparison between Cypress and Selenium. And there's an article being published soon, and I woefully underprepared to give exact details of who wrote it and which publication, but maybe you know more about it than I do. The Agile Carpenter is the Twitter handle, and it's a German publication. And he's giving talks at various conferences, and the idea being that the comparing Selenium and Cypress is like comparing power tools, where it's like they serve a different need. So like comparing your bandsaw to your circular saw isn't really a useful comparison. And based on the usage I've seen for who's like a heavy power user of Selenium and a heavy power user of Cypress is two like largely different use cases. And the constraints that each tool have they point you in a different direction. And so it seems like the large popularity for Cypress, it's really front-end developers who want really fast feedback and really want to be involved as early as possible in the development workflow. And then Selenium solves a completely different like Swiss Army solution of like you want cross-browser testing and you want it fully scaled on hardware because you're simulating user interactions in the browser. And so I think both have a place, and I think in 5 years they'll both be around. I just think that at this point, since WebDriver is a standard, there's no killing it. And so, and I think that it was de facto, and it has such a huge install base, and it still solves a real problem. And I think that Cypress solves a real problem too. It's just a different problem. But it's easy to draw that comparison. So I don't think anything's going to die. I think both will thrive. So.
I think it really depends on how many browsers will die in next 5 years. And we see there is a really big possibilities that in 5 years there will be only one browser, and it probably will affect our need of cross-browser testing at all. So this can actually hit WebDriver pretty well, but I still think that in mobile world, WebDriver and its philosophy of doing standard things with the same API still works in Appium. So even the cross-browser testing on desktop will be killed, still WebDriver is a thing. Yeah.
I'm naturally conflict averse, so I want to try to encourage people in the community to stop fostering this sort of, like, there's a for-profit company that's released an open source tool. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a gigantic community of people who are not at all profit motivated working on the Selenium case. We're not rivals. People have said they're like Coke and Pepsi. They're not like Coke and Pepsi. They're like a drill versus a hammer. It's just, Coke and Pepsi are interchangeable roughly. That's my point. So my only point is let's just take a breath and realize that we're all solving problems that can help each other out. So let's hold hands and sing.
Okay, so I think that why this question appeared. So why people have compare Cypress and WebDriver. Maybe that because on Cypress web page, on the main page, it stated that Cypress is end-to-end framework. And people naturally think that end-to-end means Selenium and all the stuff, cross browsers and so on and so on. So maybe it's a good idea to rename and to move out this end-to-end and leave only component or something like that. What do you think?
Oh, that's again a bold one.
No, but the test is end-to-end, right? The test is end. You can open a GitHub issue, right? And once we solve the other 1,000 issues, we'll get to that and we'll rename it, and we'll like, oh.
Yeah, maybe a few words. Maybe we have this statement in mind because at the moment when the Cypress was looking for the investments, there was too many hype around it built by the marketing guys. And the most of the stories and the posts were started with the words that now here we have the new WebDriver. Now we have the killer for the WebDriver and all this stuff. And basically, I know that, like, I completely understand the reason why you have this hype and why you do this hype, but maybe it was too overkill with all these statements in these posts. And now, when these tools start to find the own market, start to fit in own niche, maybe those statements are not really quite good statements at this period. Yeah, because anyway, any tool during the time will start to find own niche on the way how they solve the problem, way it solves the problem. But the initial hype, which was built around the investments period, was too big, and that's why we still feel this hype. And a lot of the guys have still wrong maybe expectations in the mind about what this tool should does and what reason which problem it solves. Here's my vision.
Okay, right. But it's like, as it was mentioned, if two tools do a bit of different things, right, in two different ways, why we are trying to compare them, I don't know. But that's fine.
Why don't we have the third or the fourth? Is there any space for more tools?
I think there's always space for more tools. I mean, that's in open source as possible. I think that if we had more tools, then there'd be more comparisons potentially. But I don't know I mean, it also depends what problem the third tool would have to solve.
Well, today it was mentioned, like, for example, there was a talk about testing multiplayer games, like Unity-based or any other engine, right? It was said that there are mostly proprietary or kind of like that tools for every engine. No, as far as I understand, I'm not an expert there at all, like no standardization there. these directions, or or anything else that you expect to see the area to be built like the next 5 years?
Sure.
5 years, I don't know.
So potentially more specialized, although I guess gaming is quite massive, but open source tooling and potential standardization around support for game development, and then, I mean, in desktop applications, we're starting to see some of that in Appium with like WinApp driver and basically using accessibility hooks within the operating system to drive desktop applications. And I think that there's
a personal microphone to give the personal decision. Just another one for the talks.
well done. So I think it's possible, and but that seems like it, in a way, it becomes more specialized. Whereas it feels like Cypress is playing in the space, whereas Selenium does, which is trying to be a broad solution for the problem area. So.
They are not just WebDriver and not just Cypress. So at least in my talk tomorrow, I will overview about 4 different tools. Yep. But there are even more of them. Some of them are dead now, so we don't remember them. And yes, the problem is how we control browser, and it can be done in very different approach. The tool which wasn't mentioned but should be mentioned, it's Puppeteer. They also play on the field of Cypress. They play on the field of WebDriver. They are not a testing framework. That's why we don't talk about it. But still, there are big opportunities, especially the DevTools protocol of Chrome is open. Everyone could build their own solution. And if they say that it will do things better, they can create another tool. So I think this will be evolved. Probably there should be some standardization about this DevTools protocol, so it should be cross-browserish. Then it probably can be a next Selenium. So because right now Puppeteer Cypresses are much faster because they reduce this bureaucracy in talking between servers and so on. So right now, Puppeteer and Cypress are the things because they are faster, they get better feedback, they get better control of browsers. So
At the same time, they like narrower. They support only.
yes, yes. So if in 5 years there will be only Google, it will be fine.
If Microsoft moves, if Microsoft moves as it was promised towards Chromium, right? Will Cypress work there? Will Puppeteer work there? Any things like that? I don't know. Maybe that will move towards some standardization, at least in the web testing space, because it seems like we are primarily focused on web in explanations. But right again, there are still other areas. It was like support for Windows 10 testing using Selenium-based protocol, something like that. So seems like good direction.
No, the desktop will be dead in 5 years for sure. It's like no one need to care about it.
We will put everything in Electron apps, and desktop testing will be just the same as Chrome testing, so everything will be fine. But still, I would miss the world where we have cross-browser testing and different browser engines competing. So it would be fit if we will struggle.
Will you miss the IE browser?
Just as an idea that this browser exists and potentially can change something.
Say that Safari is the new IE6.
Yep.
Haven't mentioned that yet, but that's a problem as well.
Yeah. So.
Who's next?
Yeah, probably. But that touches very interesting topic, right? Like when we speak about this possibilities for the new tools, right? We may try to talk about what's missing in the existing. What do you think? What's kind of missing in existing tools? In order to build some sort of a field for an opportunity, you kind of need to have issues with existing tools. Otherwise, like there is no space for innovation, right? What problems now causes you a lot of troubles?
I think that there are tools that exist for these areas, but that QA folks generally don't use them, which is performance, load, stress, and security. And that's an opportunity, I think, to be integrated in with some of the tool stack that we use at this point. I also think that a lot more work can be done in the visual end to facilitate better testing along various different parts of the process. Performance testing in particular, I think, is going to grow in importance because I have if I can take 15 seconds to tell another story about Retell Me Not, it's that Retell Me Not took their eye off of the page performance ball for a little while in 2013. And so the page performance started to slow down just a little bit. Little by little, pieces of the page would stop rendering quite as fast. We didn't really notice it that much. And until one day, Google released an algorithm update called Panda, which murdered the whole site and our page rankings because it indexed page performance so high near the top. And if we had had a tool that could just sit alongside Selenium and do performance benchmarking, regardless of load on the site, but actual pure JavaScript rendering benchmarks, and compare that against a baseline, we would have noticed that this was happening to us. So I think there's a lot of work that could be done in a tool like that. For me, what I want to know in a new tool is, outside of the W3C standard, what would it need to support? Because to me, I hope that we should be able to consider the W3C standard sort of a solved but open problem. So I don't want to keep solving that problem over and over again. I want to solve new problems like page performance benchmarking and security. So that's my take.
It has, yeah.
The question was whether or not Google has the tools built in, and it absolutely does. But I don't know of a vendor or anyone who just sort of produces that for you. It's a manual process to go in and fix it, or a manual process to go and write some code to pull that out at this point.
Chrome did open it, and by the way, New Relic, as I remember, can do this static performance analysis.
Cool.
Already.
Cool.
Well, Chrome allows you to do really low-level stuff with CSS painting and the rest, and how JavaScript is rendered.
You ought to get a chair.
Thank you. Don't like to be on camera.
No, we don't need you on camera, but we need your voice on camera.
Oh, okay, that's my voice.
Okay, who's next?
So yeah, the question was about Google is already have that. Google and DevTools allow you to kind of get very detailed information on the performance and all that kind of stuff, right? Like, any opinion on that?
So I know that one change that's being pushed, at least within Selenium, is giving integration hooks for CDP, and so being able to get this kind of information out. I think I don't know how largely this is in response to the fact that Cypress exists and gives access, or there's Puppeteer and like all of these that give access to this low-level hooks. But that's an integration that's being built tightly to get that information out. And then just to add on to Marcus's point, I think also accessibility testing is also a big one. And I think that accessibility testing is something that's often easily overlooked when applications are built, but it's not only does it help people who need accessibility, but it gives you hooks for your automation, and so by virtue of you doing accessibility, your apps become more testable. So I think that's another area that's being talked about a lot, and I just don't think anyone's fully solved.
So our goal as Cypress team is to make end-to-end testing, very functional testing, so simple, so done by developers, so that QA doesn't have to like do that rote kind of repetition thing, and instead QA can actually concentrate on things that are hard to do, like accessibility testing, performance load testing, security testing, like the things where like human intellect really matters and not like clicking on a button. We also have looked at performance testing where in order for you to collect performance data, you actually have to drive application so it does something and you measure it. And unfortunately, Cypress cannot do it because we instrument everything and we do all those checks. We actually slow down your app a lot by having our commands one by one. So performance data is unreliable. So the field is yours, create the next performance testing tool.
Oh, it's actually easy, but it's like, in most cases, it's useless, right? So the ability to pull the data is there, but then the question is how to consume it. Yep. Any other questions, ideas?
No question about somebody dying. The question about WSOC standard. So there are some things that are not yet a standard. For example, getting logs from the browser. There are some like reasons behind it. So what's your feeling about like, for example, about the logs? Let's start with this one. So like Chrome has DevTools, right? It's much easier with this one, but like Firefox don't have some kind of this stuff. So what are the possibilities for these kind of things that are like very hard to get a standard to? How it may like be finalized?
Wait 5 years, it will die.
Like,
I don't think I'm taking anything away from my talk tomorrow on this topic by talking about this, because I'm not going into super detail tomorrow about the standard or anything. But basically, what I would say is that we, as the Selenium community, have done a pretty good job, but not as good a job as we should, pulling the browser vendors into the conversations. We've done it. We've worked together with them to develop the standard. I think that there are certain resistance to them opening the Komodo too much to incorporate some of that into the standard. And also, the standard is open, so I think contributions to that standard to help define some of that stuff would probably help. It's a vague answer, but I think it's there were bigger priorities placed in this first round of standardization for the actions and commands that you could give to the browser, and not so much on the discoverability, observability of it, which I think is coming in the future drafts. Anyone else have to add to that?
I think that some things don't belong in the standard potentially. Some things just are too difficult to standardize potentially. And there could be very different opinions from the vendors. So for them to come to a consensus on something like logs. So the compromise might be instead to offer the ability to get the information through a well-documented API, and making sure that Selenium, for instance, could access, through Gecko driver, through Firefox it would be through Marionette, and through Chrome it would be CDP, and just making sure that that information is accessible in a reliable way. And then, the logs could vary wildly, but offering a standard way to access that information, I think, would be the compromise. But I don't necessarily know or know what the plans are. But the further in the weeds we get, I think those problems are so far away and so unimportant if you can just make that same information available cross browser. So that's what I would assume would happen.
I think the browser will standardize all the things like that as soon as the whole world will agree on the same electrical socket outlet, and then we'll be good.
Yeah.
It's like a basic information, right? Getting the logs about the browser.
Yeah, but for them it's like the whole performance issue, right? They think for some people the streaming is important of logs, for other people the complete log, they store it in different binary formats, so different fields, so I don't think they'll standardize.
Kind of like own list of comments. So it may end up like you having like 20 comments for Chrome, 20 for Firefox. So it's not like a standard, it's kind of like separated part, and it's been like really hard to reuse it in the same kind of code base. So that's kind of risk that I see. And
Yes, maybe.
you have a nice
I just
microphone.
wanted to say that you're professionally doing this, so you will do it. So the absence of standard in this area allows to drive innovation. This is the point why Puppeteer appeared. So it's okay that we have mature, good, tested tool that standardizes everything, but we need some room to innovate. And so when we get this stable, probably it will go at some point of standard. But while we are not sure how it will behave, what will be changed, so it's not a standard, and that's okay. So all these dev tools with a mass of information, we just got it like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, so it's not a big, long time, and we didn't have it tested yet, and to figure out what features of this are important for testing, what are not. So I know, or you already can do code coverage from the browser, which is just blowing my mind. I don't even understand why should I do it, but maybe we will get some standards on this in 5 years too. That would be awesome.
CSS code coverage.
Wow.
Okay. Any other interesting ideas around? So the logs from a browser, I don't even know why we need that. But probably there are some space for that.
What are you gonna do with the browser logs?
That's my question, right? Like, what the idea behind having the browser logs, right? There is this open trace and other kind of trace thing, but what the idea of having this browser logs? What kind of information are you looking there?
Potentially you can get, for example, I'm working in the Kibana team and we have lots of information, kind of logs. So basically, logs is the way to know better what was the potential pitfall you faced with the application. So I mean, it's really nice to have this information. I don't understand why you don't need this information. Maybe if you test in a very like easy commerce app, then it's not a problem. But if it's like kind of Kibana or something.
Yeah.
No, my point here is that like it's it's just one example. The other example is like element visibility. There are other topics that are not yet standardized, right? Standard is still in progress. It's really nice that vendors already discussed it. I'm just like wondering, are they really discussing how to, like, for example, Mozilla should do something and they plan to do this? Or it's more like, okay, we just discuss it, okay, let's leave it like for the next session in a half year, because like Cypress also is working on the cross-browser support, right? So like, I'm just wondering how it's gonna be like, standard will grow, or maybe like Cypress just will add compatibility, and like, if you would like to do like cross-browser testing, you will just switch to Cypress. I mean, yeah, I know that Cypress, they doing different things, but I'm just talking about like how it's gonna be moving in like some time.
That's a very good topic. That's pretty much like, if you are sending a lot of information from your JavaScript and the rendering into the logs in the browser and not using the Google protocol or wherever the protocol, which actually kind of do that information, some part of that information, not everyone, right? Like, you potentially might need those logs, right?
Okay, I didn't want to say anything, but I'll say it. So imagine you're testing something, right? And the page, you know, you exercise, you click, you type in. Functionally, it looks okay. And then, you know, you bring image diffing and you visually compare the page, how it looks after you like went through all the little steps. And visually, it looks different, right? So AppleTools has a plugin for Cypress. Thank you very much. And you know, it tells you, here's this color that changed. What do you do next? Right? You can look at the video. Nice, okay. That doesn't tell you much. That's just the surface. So here's what we're working on. Thank you very much for making it. But we told it. You now have to go back into the history of a test and try to figure out, here's my test that actually failed because visually it looks different at the end. Can I pull the logs for previously passing tests? Not the video, but the logs of all events that happened during the test. So we can figure out from this history of 2 tests where there was a difference. And the difference could be anything, right? So the visual tool can tell me which pixels are different. Maybe it will tell me, here's the CSS color that has changed. But what has caused that change? So now you have to go back to the logs, and we have to compare multiple things. Maybe XHR returns something else. Maybe there was a different CSS bundle that loaded for some reason. So we're actually looking into recording everything that happens in a browser, which is like megabytes of information, storing it efficiently so we can compare and do this thing where when you're debugging a failing test, it will tell you, it changed the color of this particular item because this particular XHR returned 2 items instead of 3 as it usually returns. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. So just to add more context, you described 2 features in one essentially. So Applitools has the image comparison against baselines, and it does either strict pixel by pixel or it does layout comparison. And then we also have the ability to do what we call root cause analysis, which when you run your test, it'll upload all of the assets from the page. So all of the markup, all the CSS, all the JavaScript, and then that gets analyzed as well. And then you can do a diff against the parts of a page that changed. So you say, oh, this looks different on the page. Why is it different? And it will highlight what markup on the page changed. And it's like, oh, the line height changed or something else changed. And what you're describing is the next level, which is, right, but why did that happen? And if it's related to a specific network request or something else. And potentially even going further back from there, I could foresee someone doing something where it's like we could get blame all the way back to the change. I think that's where things are heading. So it's cool to see that that's what you're working on. So that's like here are the edges of what we offer, and then Cypress could pick up the rest. That's pretty cool.
Okay.
He's very bored. Ask him something.
I have a question that's asked in the context of Selenium WebDriver, but maybe it's a more general tool-independent question, because our project, our automation solution struggles with what I imagine a lot of people do, which is test reliability. We have a lot of false negatives, and the topic of flaky tests appeared at least in one talk today, and maybe you have some tips or solutions or tools, maybe in-house ones or generally available ones, to handle this.
Hire proper people.
Yep. Flaky tests.
Yeah. So I think, Marcus and I have very strong opinions on this topic. Do you want to talk about this, Marcus? Well, I'm sure all 5 of us do, but Marcus and I specifically have like an analytical approach to this problem. Okay, I'll talk, and if Marcus wants to add. I at one point built a static code analysis tool for Selenium, which I eventually, instead of open sourcing, I at least talked about the heuristics, the grading heuristics that go into it. And this came out of my frustration as a consultant when I would go to an enterprise and they'd ask me to review some test code, and I'd ask, okay, well, how many test repositories do you have across your teams? And it's like, oh, we have 300. Okay, and what's the average size of like a single page object in one of these repositories? Oh, it's like 3,000 lines. So, and the engagement's 2 weeks. So this would mean I'd basically be able to look at one repository, and there's 300. And so what that turned into was, how do I train a team of test engineers to know what to look for? And look at one, give that as an example to look at, and then go from there. And so that turned into this scoring rubric, these heuristics to know how to not write terrible test code and not have flaky locators, and how to do these things. And that turned into, oh, this should totally be a tool. And then I eventually stopped working on it because I took a job and moved to another country. And so instead started working on Selenium IDE instead. And so what happened was I gave a talk, a couple of talks about this topic. So if you go back and look at like SauceCon from last year and Automation Guild, you can see this grading rubric. But I encourage people in the industry to take this knowledge and do something with it. And I was shocked that somebody actually did. And so unfortunately, it's just in Java, so maybe that's a good thing for you. I don't know. Probably not. Okay, but at least this is a good example of how it's implemented. So a guy by the name of Quo Ding, he recently went on, he's like kind of doing a speaking tour. So he went on Test Talks. If you go to testtalks.com, it's the Joe Colantonio podcast. He gave an interview talking about building this effectively a linter, a static code analysis tool around using a SonarQube plugin and taking the heuristics I've talked about and putting them into a tool and like hooking it up to IntelliSense and like IntelliJ. And so I think it's phenomenal. So my hope is that somebody sees his work and then says, Java, we need something like ESLint for, for Selenium and JavaScript. So let's do, so like someone could build a port. Or I could decide to open source what I wrote, which as far as prototypes go, it's passable, but it's like built entirely using regular expressions. So it's a little bit fragile. So, but I'm happy that people are in the industry are doing this because I think it would actually make a difference. I think that people that use it will see, oh, these are brittle locators. Maybe there's some ways you can offer recommendations. And the only way that that becomes more usable is to get more data from the page and start to offer recommendations for better locators. And these are problems we're solving in Selenium IDE. We're working on how to record more realistic locators, have multiple locators with better fallback strategies, try to offer potentially in the future some kind of statistical analysis to make the tests more resilient and self-healing over time. And I think that if we could potentially make tools like that available, even open source, not just in Selenium IDE, but for people who maybe hook up a listener to their test runs. But the starting point is your test code structured well? Cool. Are you doing practices in your test code that will lead to flakiness? Do you have locators that are concerning that you should look at, that are like potentially going to cause the test to fail later and you just don't know it yet? Like we can highlight those. And then it's on you as the engineer to go and investigate, but it helps you like zoom in where the problem areas are. And so at least maybe check out what Quo Ding has done, because I think it's a really good example of some of the thoughts that I've put into this space. I don't know, Marcus, you have anything to add?
I didn't, but now I've thought of some things. One is Richard Bradshaw gave a talk in London, Selenium Conference 2016, I think. A very good talk about flaky tests. And I mean, I wouldn't probably go as far with him on the language, but he basically said that tests that are flaky are engineered to be flaky. And that's a pretty strong opinion, but I mean, it's interesting. What I'd say is, besides everything that David mentioned, that when I was at RetailMeNot, I was a very smug jerk because I ran a test suite by myself that ran 700 Selenium tests, and they were green every single day. But the group that was running the main website, they ran 2,000 tests, and 200 failed every day. Now, it's not because mine was better. I was able to be smug about it because my system that I was testing was an internal system, Chrome only, the system of record for mastering all data inside the ecosystem. His was the consumer website. You had to test 40 or 50 different browser combinations dependent on multiple dozens of different systems feeding data into it in the correct way. There's no doubt that stuff is going to be flaky. So first, my prescription is don't run so many damn tests. That's too many tests. Like, it's just too many, trying to do too many things end to end. Test your services individually, have a few smoke tests, and then ship it, because you can roll back really quickly in the environment that we had built for ourselves. But mainly when you have so many dependencies that you rely on, that service has to be up 24/7, because I never stop running my tests. And if that one service breaks, 500 tests fail. Well, that's being engineered for flakiness. You either need to test the status of that system and cancel those tests from ever running, or you need to mock the data out, or you need to do something to engineer reliability into those tests. So that's my take on it, besides what Dave said.
So it sounds like do not do the manual testing, just like, but do the brainial testing. Because as my vision, how you can fix the flaky test with just static code analysis for the Selenium code. Because the static code analysis can show you that you write a good code, but nobody saves you that somebody wrote a crap within this code. So it can be still flaky, it cannot even test something, it can do assert true, but as from the perspective of the static analysis, it will be the perfect code. Well, so once again, the outcome maybe it sounds like find the proper people to write the proper test, which will test something, and which will be stable.
But I think we need to leave room for... I think we just need to leave a little bit of room for not everything testers try to test is under the tester's control, which is why I would say scale back what you're trying to test until they fix their shit.
Like, there is one other thing that you're missing.
Which one?
On T, it starts on DM its ends, right? That because you need to know the reason of a failure, right? Because like most of the failures may be in flakiness, may be because of a data, not because of a tests, right? And then which means that you need to do better job on test data management.
That was my talk 20 minutes before. I'm tired already.
Just staying on the same subject of flakiness and just looking from the different perspective on it, like interpreting these false positive results, right? It's been in quite a few talks recently using ML to interpret the results like false positive. I remember a very good job done by Google engineers that used really heavy statistic math just to analyze like what tests fail with what and making a really decision, does it matter that this test, like if this test fails on its own, like in 99% it's really false positive, so you shouldn't really take that into account just to make the decision that it is a regression or something like that. So and question is, well, how do you see those techniques and technologies yeah, affect the results of actually develop and affect how we run tests and how we interpret the results and how we what we call green build, red build.
You want me to say something about report portal?
Like, come on.
Well, so within the report portal, we do analyze this. Like, first of all, you said about the like, sounds pretty ridiculous that if your test not failing for 99% of the time, just like let's remove it. It's wrong because, for example, if you have the airbags in your car and it doesn't like bang during the 10 years, it doesn't mean that you should remove it from there.
The idea was like an opposite. If your test fail 99% of the time, and it's actually like false positive, right? That's exactly what you kind of trying to achieve, right?
Yeah, for the report portal, we collect we trying it to a bit make it the same like Google explained, but we use the test cases logs for that. So basically the logs which provided by the test automation, and we like collect this data, and the manual work should be done. The engineers should mark which those reasons belongs to, and it's pretty equal to the talk which was in this room about machine learning, that at the end of the day, then you have like hundreds of the executions, you will see those clusters of the fails which belongs to particular reason according to particular pattern of the logs you have in it. And like in this case, if you see that this particular test case failing with this kind of the pattern repeated inside, so basically like with particular number of the probability, it should be this reason of the fail. And in this case, if you will overlook through all your fails, it can, or let's say, it have a pretty big probability to suggest you that those test cases failing because of that reason.
So what you're actually talking about is kind of a triaging the reason of the failure, right?
Right.
Okay. I probably meant a little bit different. Like, well, again, I've always been more interested in this. If my build is red, right, and I'm really a fan of continuous integration, I just should stop, and everyone should be on that, fixing the thing, and actually that has a cost attached to it, right? So, and if I can, with whatever reasons, again, with Google in its scale, as a good example, can tell from the very beginning it's a false positive, I can save an enormous amount of time and money, not putting all my team members on fixing the thing as soon as possible. So it's kind of probably a very pragmatic approach, not really know the reason, which is good in itself, and it's really good that you do that, but rather whether I should pull the plug, right? Like in a lean development. And I can move on and say, okay, it's just fine, just something flakes. But not to stop the entire line.
That's a trade-off, because you should select whether you follow the fail fast approach, that if you have something red, let's put everyone on these fixes and to find out why it's failing, But on the other hand, yeah, as you said, save the money, let the pipeline go next step, but you should have the evidence that this test is just about nothing. But once again, it really, if I hope one day we will be have enough information after the log analysis to predict and say that okay, this type of the logs belongs to the critical fails of your application, and this type of the logs belongs to just trivial changes, like 1 pixel left, 1 pixel right, and the test case will fail. But there is still a lot of room to improve it, and yeah, right now we should make this trade-off decision: should we go here or here?
That's like you explaining the simple things very complex, right? Like even your report portal, you have two states. One is the product bug, one is an automation bug.
And system issue.
Yeah, right. So like fairly saying the two of them is like we're stopping the pipeline, the rest is like we'll go with that. Right. You just need to implement the RESTful, which will return that to a CI back. The webhook. And you are done. Like almost like a Google. Are we good? Yep. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks to an experts.